Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can analyze the Madeleine McCann case, including looking at any mental health and personality factors that may be at work here. So the Madeleine McCann case is arguably one of the most well-known missing person cases in modern times. We see a Netflix docuseries that was made about this case, although Kate and Jerry McCann, the parents of Madeleine, didn't participate in that special. So just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. So first I'll take a look at the timeline of the disappearance, take a look at the evidence, and then answer the question, who was responsible? Of course, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll provide my analysis of that question and look at some mental health and personality factors. So now moving to the timeline of the disappearance. This case starts on April 28, 2007. Jerry and Kate McCann, two physicians from the United Kingdom, arrive in Praia da Luz, Portugal, with their 3 children. Madeleine McCann, 3 years old, with her 4th birthday being just 2 weeks away, and 2-year-old twins. It was the McCann's intention to stay in this resort town for 7 nights. After arriving, they stayed in the now famous Unit 5A, a ground floor apartment in the waterside village. While they were there, they spent time with a few other people who were also on vacation. These people would become known as the Tapas 7, named after the restaurant I'll talk about in a moment. 4 of this group were physicians and 1 was a lawyer. The members of this group were staying in apartments near 5A. The Tapas 7, along with the McCanns, chose to spend their nights at the Tapas restaurant at the Ocean Club while leaving their children in their respective apartments. This restaurant is about 160 feet away from apartment 5A, in a straight line. Now, to walk it is about 295 feet, because one has to go out of the entrance of that area onto the sidewalk and around to the apartment. So this is almost the length of a football field. The apartment doors were not visible from the table they were sitting at in the restaurant. They had this system where one of them would get up about every half hour or so and check on the children. Sometimes they would only check on their own children, and other times they would also check on the other children from other members of the group. This takes us to May 3, 2007, 7 p.m. Jerry McCann put Madeleine and the younger twins in bed in the apartment. 8 p.m. Jerry and Kate drank a bottle of wine. At 8:35, they are the first to arrive at the Tapas restaurant. They await the arrival of their friends. They left the patio door in their apartment unlocked. Earlier in the week, they had used their key to unlock the front door and check on the children, but they were worried that this would be too noisy, that it would wake up the children. So they switched to this method where they just left the apartment unlocked. Not long after this, the group comes together. They're all eating and drinking. They were reported as being slightly more rowdy than the tables around them. At about 9:05 p.m., Jerry gets up to check on his children. As he approaches the children's bedroom, he notices that the door, which was only left open a little, about 5 degrees, was now open at about a 45-degree angle. Jerry found this to be odd, but he saw nothing else unusual, so he reset the door to 5 degrees and left. Now, sometime around 9:10 or 9:15 p.m., another member of the group, Jane Tanner, goes to check on her daughter. As she is walking next to the apartment building, she notices a man walking away from the building carrying a sleeping girl in his arms. After checking on her daughter, she returns to the table. Now moving to 9:30 p.m., Kate McCann gets ready to check on her children, but another member of the group, Matthew Oldfield, offers to check on them as he is checking on his children. Kate accepts this offer. In the McCann's apartment, we see Oldfield notices that the door is open again, but he wasn't aware of how the door was left, so this didn't stand out to him. He looks in on the children, but never actually sees Madeleine. So he really phoned this in. The first rule of checking on children is to make sure they are actually there. I'm not sure that isn't the only rule of that exercise. 10 p.m. It is once again Kate's turn to check on her children. As she approaches the bedroom door, she notices that it's now all the way open. Evidently, she tried to pull the door shut, but the air forced the door shut even faster. So then she pushes it back open, only to find the twins in their beds, but Madeleine missing. The window is also open in that room. Kate then ran back to the Tapas restaurant, leaving the 2-year-old twins behind, and tells everybody that Madeleine is missing. The police were called and arrived at about 10:30 p.m. They made numerous mistakes in the investigation. Just a few examples here. They allowed the crime scene to be contaminated. They failed to notify all the different agencies about the abduction. They didn't interview everybody who may have seen something. They didn't get a roadblock set up until 10 a.m. the next morning. And they did not seem to understand that the first 24 hours after an abduction was critical. Now, of course, they didn't know for certain that it was an abduction, but they really did have to run under that assumption. In a situation like this, almost half of recovered children are found within 3 hours. 94% of recovered children are found within 72 hours. 74% of children who are ultimately murdered are dead within 3 hours. Now moving to the evidence in this case. The investigation went on for quite a while. We see in the beginning the Portuguese police investigated. Later on, Scotland Yard started investigating. And we see a number of private investigators that were hired as well. A few different people, including the McCanns, were identified as possible suspects. Many people were interviewed. Reports came in of sightings from all over the world. And of course, we see the dogs were brought in to search for evidence. There's some conflicting accounts in terms of what was actually found, which really makes the case a little more confusing. So taking a look at the DNA specifically, even though there are a lot of different reports about the dogs detecting a dead body and blood in the apartment and on the McCann's rental car, the analyses of the collected samples were inconclusive. Even when the police thought they had something with the DNA, their theory didn't really make a lot of sense. The dogs detected something in a rental car that was rented 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance. So they had this theory that Kate or Jerry must have stored the body in a freezer for all that time, then went back and got it, put it in their vehicle, and then dumped it somewhere, right? So it just didn't make a lot of sense. Now, in this case, there were numerous reports of suspicious people, no shortage of them at all. As I mentioned before, Jane Tanner saw that person walking away from the apartment carrying a child. A man who was on vacation reported that he had been walking in the same spot carrying his daughter. The police determined it was very likely that Tanner saw that individual. Other witnesses, Mary and Martin Smith, also on vacation, saw a man carrying a child at 10 p.m. They reported that he looked uncomfortable and he did not look like a tourist. There were numerous reports of suspicious men hanging around the apartment earlier that day, on May 3, including reports of men asking for money for a non-existent orphanage. That certainly seems suspicious. One of those men was asking a tourist for money, but looking past her as he was talking. So she was at the doorway of her apartment. He was facing her, but looking past her to look at her daughter. So this gave her kind of an uneasy feeling. Later that same day, he entered that apartment, approached the daughter, but was scared off by the mother, right? So that was an important incident, I think, because it was so similar to what may have happened with Madeleine. Then we see reports of a man who was entering apartments wearing a mask and committing assaults against children. A number of these crimes had been committed in the days leading up to May 3. When considering all these reports together, this little vacation village was like one of the most seedy places on the planet. All these suspicious men oddly lingering about, frightening people. How did anyone feel comfortable there? It doesn't seem like a very safe place. As of the time of making this video, Madeleine McCann is still missing, and the police do not appear to be any closer to solving the case. In 2019, there was some talk of a murderer who was serving life in prison in Germany, who might be a good suspect. It's thought that he was the intruder wearing the mask that I talked about before. It turns out that he was cleared by the police, but they may be looking for another suspect who is similar to that individual, so a similar MO. This is a familiar pattern in this case. The police think they have somebody, or the investigators think they have somebody, and they end up with the lead not really panning out. So who is responsible in this case? What happened here? What are the mental health and personality factors in a case like this? Well, it's important to start with this. I don't know who did this. I can only speculate about who did it and what the other factors were. It's important to recognize that over 97% of children who are reported missing are eventually returned home. No matter what scenario I'm looking at here, it is unlikely. However, one explanation has to be what happened, right? Something had to happen. Madeleine McCann is definitely missing. I will look at the evidence for and against all the major theories of this crime, from the least probable to the most probable, in my opinion. I divide this up into 3 major theories. Of course, some of them have multiple versions under each theory. So the first theory, Madeleine exited the apartment on her own and somehow died or was taken after that. This is possible. However, it was reported that Madeleine was very tired. The Netflix special made it seem like the McCanns did not remember if they had given sedatives to the children. One of the top of 7 believed that Kate McCann did sedate the children. Either way, it's unlikely that she walked out. If she did, she probably would have been spotted soon after. The chances that she would not only exit the apartment but then die in a way where her body would never be recovered, it's almost impossible. Second theory, Kate and or Jerry were somehow involved. So murder, or perhaps they were covering up an accidental death. Statistically, the parents are the most likely perpetrators of a crime like this. In many cases, though, the parents are separated or divorced, and that was not the case here. Although Kate was angry at Jerry the night before, she slept in the same bedroom as the children. This doesn't necessarily constitute a significant problem in the relationship. She did this because she said he wasn't good at expressing emotions. Looking at premeditated murder, I find it incredibly improbable that they chose to kill one of their 3 children, do so together in a conspiracy, and commit the murder on vacation. On top of this, they would do so in a way where they left no conclusive evidence. Just doesn't seem like it's very likely. As far as the theory about covering up an accident, this one seems slightly more probable in this land of low probability events. Madeleine could have fallen and hit her head. She could have drowned in a bathtub or something like that. They could have given her too much sedative, although they were both physicians, so I think that would be somewhat unlikely. The problem here really is the testimony of the top of 7. There's no way that all of them conspired to cover up this type of crime. Even if they somehow did conspire, that left one of the McCanns just a half hour to do everything they needed to do to dispose of the body. As far as the theory that Kate and or John quickly hid the body and then went back later, they didn't have a moment's peace after the press got involved in this case. So they would have had no opportunity to retrieve a body and then dispose of it. The last item pointing against this theory is the fact that the McCanns have worked tirelessly to find their daughter after the disappearance, hiring private investigators, albeit largely from donated funds, talking to politicians, enlisting volunteers. They have really lived a life geared toward Madeleine's safe return. I guess this could all be to throw people off of their trail, but over time, if they were the perpetrators, they would get lazy. They would start to distance themselves from all the work. They would want the story to end, right? So it would be really impossible to keep this up for a lifetime. One piece of evidence that supports this accident theory would be the negligence demonstrated by these parents. They made a number of mistakes here. They left 3 children, all under the age of 4, in an unlocked apartment alone for a half hour at a time so they could spend time with their friends and drink. All this while in a foreign country. They had access to a babysitting service. One was available there at that resort. Kate would write in her book that she thought that leaving the children with babysitters was unwise. Although now, of course, she regrets that decision. One of the couples in the top of 7 used a baby monitor, right? So they tried to monitor their children in some way. Now, I think everyone in the situation was technically negligent, but at least a few of them tried to mitigate the effects of their less than intelligent decisions. The McCanns did not. Clearly, the McCanns have paid dearly for their exceedingly poor judgment, but Madeleine paid the highest price of all. It really amazes me that 2 physicians would leave their children alone under the circumstances. There's really no evidence of common sense here. As I mentioned before, some of the other members were physicians as well, and they did the same thing. The last item I'll mention with this theory is the reaction of Kate and Jerry. Many people believe that they didn't cry enough. They weren't upset enough. I've talked about this in other videos. No one knows how they will react to something like this. We know from Kate that Jerry was not good at expressing emotions, and from other people that Jerry was not likable. Interestingly, I think the best evidence supports that Kate did react appropriately, if there is such a thing. Soon after Madeleine went missing, people reported that Kate was visibly distraught and blamed herself for leaving Madeleine alone. Now moving to the third theory. This is the theory that Madeleine was abducted by strangers. There are 2 versions of this theory. She was taken by an organized human trafficking operation, and the other theory is that a lone assailant took her for the purposes of assaulting her sexually. So organized crime versus lone intruder. The organized crime theory was well supported by witness statements featured in the Netflix special, for example, but I would be very surprised if an operation like this would target the daughter of wealthy British citizens vacationing in Portugal. This is asking for a lot of attention from law enforcement. Criminals like this have many easier targets to choose from. One item that supports this theory is the fact that Madeleine was taken even though people were going back periodically and checking on her. Like somebody had to conduct reconnaissance and know she was there, know that no other adults were with her, and know the apartment was unlocked. It would seem unlikely that a lone intruder would be able to gather this much intelligence. That brings me to the intruder theory. I believe this is the most probable of all these explanations. The intruder likely blended in among all those other suspicious characters that were hanging around, right? There were so many of them, no one would stand out in that situation. He was able to figure out the timing of people checking on the children, or he simply dodged them through random error. Now, the problem with this theory, of course, is that if there were a person operating in this area like that, they would have committed similar crimes. It would be difficult to continue committing crimes like this without drawing attention. So if this intruder were local, he would get caught eventually. I think that really connects back to the most recent theory that the police have. A career criminal who traveled and committed crimes in various locations was the perpetrator. There's one piece of evidence that really supports the stranger theory, both versions of it. The restaurant had a note saying that the group wanted to be at a specific table so they could see their apartments because they were leaving their kids alone. Evidently, that note was in a position where a number of people could have seen that. So somebody could have seen that and then called somebody they knew, or the perpetrator could have walked by and seen it and decided that he was going to commit that crime. The last element I'll look at here is the investigation, specifically the job done by the Portuguese police. I already spoke about some of their failures. I think what really stood out for me was how the Portuguese police did not seem to be concerned with justice. Rather, they just wanted to close the case. They offered Kate McCann 2 years in prison if she would confess. If she didn't do it, what's the point in making her confess? Also, by offering her 2 years in jail and no jail time for Jerry, they really tipped their hand. It was obvious they had no case at all. I think what really topped off the whole demonstration of incompetency was the police sketch. Now, some of these sketches that came out later were fine, like the one that looked like the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, but the oval sketch was not helpful. I can appreciate the desperation. There's a witness, she can't remember the face, you want to put something out there. But like one police officer said in the Netflix special, what was the point of publishing that sketch? The point of these sketches is identification. Who would be apprehended with a sketch like this? An egg? Wearing a toupee? I would think that a person with no face would have bigger problems than worrying about being a kidnapper. I was also wondering, who drew this sketch? A 6-year-old who just lost an Easter egg hunt? I'm going to find that egg one way or the other. Or maybe he just couldn't take "I can't" for an answer when the witness was asked to describe what she saw. I think what happened here is the police wanted to typify their performance in this case with one simple drawing. Mission accomplished. I know whenever I talk about controversial cases, there will be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.